Part 127. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1263. The courtiers all looked at Yan Du in horror. Could it be that Prime Minister Wright really intends to agree to Qi Wenjin's proposal? At a time like this, shouldn't he not wait for the other party to finish speaking and smash his thoughts to pieces like the autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves? Let the people supervise the imperial court officials. Just kidding, the people are so stupid. If they are deceived or bribed to falsely accuse them, isn't this putting everyone in the court at risk? With Qi Wenjin's character, they felt that his proposal was not the most daring, only bolder. Rong Xian also took a strange look at Yan Du. Yan Du came from a family. Although he was gentle and humble on the surface, he was the most proud in his heart. It was okay when Taifu Yan was around. At most, he loved to be close to the children of the same family. He is still gentle and polite to poor students. But in recent years, it may be that the power of the poor family has become more and more powerful, and he has been in the top position for a long time, and his requirements for officials from the poor family are almost harsh. He even has opinions on the children of the poor family entering the court as an official, so how can he allow ordinary people to dictate the government? Rong Xian looked at Xiao Xiong with worry. Ordinary people don't know a single word and have little knowledge. How can they participate in government affairs? Xiao Xiong didn't know that everyone's brain waves were not on the same channel as his, so he still said confidently, there is no need to do it specially, as long as there are a few laws. Little Xiong said, the first rule is that the people sue the officials no longer to take the killing power, and the government must accept them all. If they reject it, they must have a reasonable reason. All the ministers were taken aback for a moment. Obviously they didn't expect Xiao Xiong to mention this point, and after a while, Shangshu of the Ministry of Punishment was the first to react and asked, what if it is a false accusation? Of course, it is dealt with according to the false accusation in the law. This is the second article I want to say. The criminal responsibility of the people for false accusation against officials should be the same as that of officials for false accusations against officials. Otherwise, the criminal responsibility of officials for false accusations against officials should be adjusted to that of civilians. It's the same as falsely accusing an official. You can discuss it yourself. Xiao Xiong said to the emperor, Your Majesty, remove the item of killing power stick, and let Yashitai strictly supervise it. Naturally, they will go to the Yamen to file a complaint, which is what the minister said about the supervision of the people. Xiao Bao also turned around and bowed to his father. Whether the parents are good or not, who else has more say than the people under their rule? Father, my son thinks that Wenjin's method is very good. Rong Xian pursed his lips and smiled, glanced at Yan Du, and came out and said, I also think this law is very appropriate. The common people have always been afraid of the government. Even if this law is amended, the common people will not dare to sue the officials if it is not difficult to survive. The officials who were about to say that there are too many common people are troublesome hesitated for a moment, and did not dare to come out. Qi Ziyuan glanced at everyone, looked at Yan Du, and asked, what do Yan Qing's family think? Yan Du went out with a straight face and said, what the left minister said is true, but the people are ignorant, and they are afraid that the wind will turn into rain. False accusations against officials will inevitably make all the officials feel cold. Moreover, the people's lives are hard, and it is inevitable that they will value profits. If there are ulterior motives, as soon as people are seduced, false accusations will become more common, so I think this matter should be cautious. Xiao Xiong immediately retorted, the body is not afraid of the shadow slanting. The officials' actions are misunderstood by the people. The explanation is that the people are ignorant. The officials who are the parents' officials should explain to the people carefully and considerately. Wisdom. As for the false accusation of the briber, is it possible that now that there is a killing stick, people with ulterior motives can't find someone who is willing to sacrifice their lives for it? Besides, the logic of the right Prime Minister is also very strange. Shouldn't we condemn the briber even more? False accusers, why did they focus on the people who were bribed in the middle? Yan Du choked. Xiao Xiang continued, my Ministry of Punishment, Dali Temple and Yashitai are not vegetarians anymore. If it is found out that it is a false accusation, then the falsely accused officials will be released from suspicion, so what should I do? The people below saw that the two prime ministers supported and opposed, and they also started to discuss. In the end, most officials still felt that it would be detrimental to them to relax the restrictions on people suing officials, and expressed their opposition one after another. However, nearly a quarter of the people expressed their support. Undoubtedly, the relaxation of this restriction will reduce many cases of corruption and violation of the law, and make the administration of officials in Daki clearer. Qi Ziyuan obviously also took a fancy to this point, so although he didn't express his position, seeing that nearly half of the people in the court expressed their opposition, he didn't immediately obey their opinions, but asked them to discuss it again. Everyone obviously understood what the emperor meant. Since so many people objected and still called for rediscussion, it must be that their opinions did not suit his wishes. Yan Du frowned, a little regretful. He knew that he would not have asked Qi Wenjin that question before, so that he could expose the matter with a few words at that time. If even a villager wants to sue an official, then what is the authority and status of the official? Although Yan Du was angry in his heart, his face was still expressionless. So Xiao Xiang didn't know that he was angry at all, and still had a good time with the courtiers below. Seeing that these people were not enlightened no matter how much they quarreled, he lost his temper and immediately cursed, what a bunch of elm bumps, you just guard your ancestors. The old system, like the Tang and Zhou dynasties, first prospered and then declined, and then the country was destroyed 200 or 300 years later. You civil servants and military generals are just one of the many officials in many dynasties. Who will remember you in future generations? Not a single one. After scolding Xiao Xiang, he turned his head and said to Xiaobao, brother prince, they don't make sense, let's ignore them. In short, you will teach your son well in the future, and let your son teach your grandson well. The grandson will teach the son, and the son will teach the grandson. In short, our Qi family will never be a fatuous emperor. Let these rotten trees bear the crime of subjugation. How did he say what they said in private? Xiaobao winked at him in a hurry, but the angry little bear didn't see it at all, and rushed forward to pull Xiaobao out, deciding not to be with a group of rotten wood. The entire court fell silent. The courtiers stared at little Xiang Xiaobao and then at the emperor with wide eyes. Their eyes expressed a unified meaning. Your Majesty, if you can endure this, then you can be called number one in the world. Filial father. This is still the first generation of Daki. Some people cursed Daki to destroy the country. If the person who said this hadn't been surnamed Qi, they definitely suspected that this person was the royal family's mortal enemy. Qi Ziyuan was also very angry, but he felt that he couldn't dismantle the child's stage, otherwise the little bear would be buried with saliva, so he said calmly, I think what Wenjin said is not unreasonable. Think about it, if you only think about the step-by-step work, what is the difference between Daki and the already subjugated Dazhu and Tang dynasty? The ministers almost vomited blood, thinking that the emperor doted on the child so much. Would everyone agree with this? Those who refused to admit defeat immediately jumped out and questioned the little bear. The son thinks that we will perish if we follow the rules of our ancestors, so how can we not perish according to your suggestion? The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1264. Xiao Xiang and Xiaobao have discussed in private how many times, how to build Daki in the future, so they opened their mouths to come. Who knows that another old minister came out and said in a deep voice, you don't need to talk about such big things as putting the people first. What you want is practical. Since you mentioned before that you want to change the official system, then tell me how you want to change it. What do you think we who are officials and butchers can do so that Daki will not perish? Rongxian couldn't see them bullying a child, so he immediately said in a deep voice, "Is there something that I have been unable to figure out after decades of being an official? Do you have the nerve to question a child?" Lord Zhuoxiang's words are wrong. We can't think of it, but we work diligently. We never disregard the entrustment of the Holy Majesty, but the Sun slanders us as ministers of subjugation. I am heartbroken, old minister. Weeping, he lifted up his robe and knelt down, saying, "Your Majesty, the prince is only 14 or 5 years old and dares to brazenly ask for reform. That's all. If you don't agree with me, just say that we are ministers of subjugation. Such slanderous ministers I can't bear to wait." As soon as this remark came out, there was a commotion below. Little Xiang blushed, and angrily said ironically, "If you are still alive 200 or 300 years later, you will be the subjects of subjugation." He only said that if there is no change, Daki will perish in 200 or 300 years, and people like them who refuse to change in order to protect their own interests will become ministers of the subjugation. When did they say it was them? Instead, they thought, the key is whether they can survive until then? My son, this is a quibble. People like us are us, aren't we? The little bear almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Yan Du saw that the more he said, the more biased he was. He couldn't help bringing the topic back and said, "The prince hasn't said how to change this official system yet." Even Qi Ziyuan couldn't help but glared at him now. He was still building firewood at this time. Didn't he know that the fire was getting hotter and hotter? They were arguing so much that he could just fling his sleeves and retreat, and the matter would be over. But Yan Du brought the topic back again. Well, he couldn't back down. Sure enough, as soon as Yan Du's words came out, someone followed him, so everyone stopped talking and waited for Qi Heiran to answer. Everyone thought he could answer. In fact, Xiao Xiang couldn't answer, but he was not ashamed at all, and said directly, "I don't know how to change the official system, but my mother knows." The courtier immediately scoffed at this. It was more nonsense than Qi Wenjin knew. Qi Ziyuan and Rongxian looked at each other. Others don't know, how can they not understand? It is really possible that these words were taught by a Ling to Xiao Xiang. Qi Ziyuan thought of a way to expose this matter and let it go, but the courtiers seemed to have grasped Xiaoxiang's shortcomings and clung to him excitedly, insisting that he talk about the official system that should be reformed. The little bear said confidently, "My mother has not had time to tell me everything in the future. When I go home and ask her, I will naturally tell you." Of course the ministers didn't believe his words. They let him go at this time. They can't talk about whether they can see him tomorrow, and the topic of seeing him may not be brought up again, so wouldn't the insult they received today be in vain? Therefore, no one was willing to let him go, and a few people even persuaded him, if the son can't figure it out, he will admit it honestly. Why push the matter to his mother? It's so unfilial, and Prince Rong will be angry again when he comes back. There were also some people who were not afraid of the height of the stage when watching a play, and shouted, "Since it was proposed by Princess Rong, why don't you call someone to tell us face to face?" As soon as the words came out, the officials behind him pulled him off, and said in a low voice, "Is it impatient to live? It's fine if you bully Qi Wenjin, it's his fault in the first place, and Prince Rong can only open his eyes when he comes back. Turn a blind eye and let it go, and drag Prince Rong into it. How long is your life?" The official thought of how much Prince Rong doted on his wife, and suddenly felt chills in his heart, and dared not say any more. But the aloof Qi Ziyuan still heard his words. He exchanged glances with Rongxian, then glanced at the little bear standing in the middle with his neck stuck in the middle, insisting that he was right, and his son who had already run to the little bear's side to show his support. Qi Ziyuan said decisively, "Since all the dear ones request so, please invite Princess Rong to come to the court." The court was silent again. Yan Du was also silent for a long time, and finally said, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid this is unreasonable, this harem woman is not allowed to interfere in politics. Princess Rong is not from the harem, Chi Ziyuan said with a big wave of his hand, and she is different from ordinary women. You also know that she has fought with Prince Rong in the south and north, and she has made great achievements in battle, let alone in court, even a female general is worthy of her. Rong Xian then smiled and said, it's a pity that I, Daki, don't have female generals and officials like Emperor Sejong, otherwise Prince Rong and Princess Rong would have a place in the court. As soon as the words came out, the ministers who were about to express their objections suddenly had nothing to say. Also, in the previous Emperor Sejong, there were women and men who were officials in the same dynasty. Princess Rong just went to the court to reply, and it seemed that there was nothing wrong with it. Seeing that there was no objection anymore, Chi Ziyuan immediately sent people out of the palace to announce them, and then asked them to set up a table. The 1-hour early morning court has not ended yet, not only the emperor himself is hungry, but also the stomachs of all the officials. It is estimated that it will be impossible to end the morning court this morning. In this case, everyone should eat something to relax while waiting for others. Chi Ziyuan is a good emperor who is sympathetic to his subordinates. He will never admit that he is cheating for his sister-in-law. First, he should make the ministers feel better, so that their subordinates will be merciful after a while. The ministers didn't know the emperor's careful thoughts, and when they saw the emperor giving him a seat and food, they immediately thanked Dade for his gratitude. After standing for nearly an hour, everyone's legs were sore, and those who came out in a hurry in the morning didn't even have breakfast, so not only can they sit and talk, but also have refreshments. I feel so happy. Do you feel happy? As soon as Mu Yangling arrived outside the main hall, she saw such a happy and harmonious picture of the monarch and his ministers. She blinked and saw the little bear sitting sideways with Xiaobao in the hall. Seeing that he was eating hard, she couldn't help but frowning. Didn't the servant who came to pass the order say that the little bear was bullied miserably? Why does it look nothing like it? Mu Yangling stood outside the door with her head lowered. The servant had already announced her arrival loudly, and Chi Ziyuan in the hall immediately chuckled and said, "Please come in, Princess Rong." The courtiers who were still joking in the hall were stunned for a moment, feeling that the rules were wrong. Shouldn't the guards deliver the report loudly when Princess Rong arrives in the front hall? Why did everyone pass the steps and only report when they reached the main hall? And it's the servant's report? Chi Ziyuan doesn't care what they think, the entire palace belongs to him, and he has the final say on the rules and regulations. I just hope that Aling can be smarter, don't give the ministers time to react, and quickly take Xiaoxiang's Xiaobao away. Xiaoxiang's mouth is as stinky as Heron's, opening his mouth will cause trouble. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1265. Chi Ziyuan expected the beginning but failed to predict the end. Because Mu Yangling appeared suddenly, the officials did not react for a while, so they watched Princess Rong walk to the center of the hall to salute the emperor in a daze, and did not react until she sat down in front of the table above Rong Xian. Princess Rong is a super first-rank concubine, and her status is indeed higher than that of the right prime minister, so there is nothing wrong with sitting there. The hall was extremely quiet for a while, and no one dared to ask questions again. For one thing, Princess Rong is a woman after all, and they can make things difficult for Qi Wenjin, because although the other party is young, he is the heir of Prince Rong's mansion, and now he is an official in the same dynasty, but this does not mean that they will also bully a woman. Secondly, everyone was really afraid that after targeting Princess Rong, Prince Rong would come back to settle accounts with them. Their quarrel with Qi Wenjin can be said to be political disagreement. They are discussing political affairs. Why are they arguing with a woman? Therefore, all of them were as silent as a gourd with its mouth sawn. If other officials were like this, Yan Du, who insisted on his own identity, would not embarrass Mu Yangling. But Mu Yangling didn't appreciate them at all, and wanted to forget about bullying her son? From her point of view, everyone's reticence at this time was obviously a guilty conscience towards her. Sure enough, Xiao Xiang must have been bullied terribly just now. So Mu Yangling spoke first, and the first thing she said when she turned her head to the emperor was, "Your Majesty, I heard that Wen Jin is fighting all the ministers and workers in the court, but I don't know why." Qi Xiaoyuan quickly winked at her, telling her to say a few soft words and quickly drag the two children down when the officials were embarrassed, and the matter was over. But Mu Yangling pretended not to see his eyes, turned to look at the opposite bear and asked, "Wen Jin, tell me." Little Xiang had been waiting for his mother to come to support him. Hearing the words, he described the debates at the court meeting today in detail, and finally said, "Mother, Tang and Fuzhou, whether it is the Tang dynasty or the Great Zhou dynasty, have all prospered, but both however, after 200 to 300 years of effort, it has been completely defeated, and the prince and I do not want to see the future of Daqing. We have studied the history of various dynasties in private, and found that they will perish for only these three reasons." Little Xiang said solemnly, "One is when the tyrant rules the ruler and makes the people miserable. She dare not say thousands of years, but it is always possible to be 300 or 500 years longer than Fuzhou in the prosperous Tang dynasty." Qi Xiaoyuan and the ministers were speechless, co-authoring you to do so many things just to make De Zhou die later? Which royal family's children don't think about their own dynasty for generations to come? Why are these two boys thinking about the subjugation of the country all day long? If it wasn't for the wrong place, Qi Xiaoyuan really wanted to beat these two boys up. But Mu Yangling felt that Xiao Xiang and Xiaobao were really excellent, and praised them with love in his eyes. "Be prepared for danger in times of peace. Your husband taught you well, it is very good for you to think of this. They don't understand it's okay with you, I support you." Both Qi Xiaoyuan and Rong Xian wanted to help their foreheads. Too bad, they forgot that the two children were taught by Mu Yangling, and they tried their best to wink at Mu Yangling, trying to make her shut up. It's a pity that the two of them are not Qi Heiran, and Mu Yangling is not interested in looking at their faces, so he didn't notice their winks. After Mu Yangling praised the child, he immediately pointed the cannon fire at the ministers, straightened his waist and asked, "What do you think the two children said is wrong?" All the ministers looked at each other and looked at the emperor. The emperor lamented in his heart, knowing that it would be impossible to confuse this matter. He could only wave his hands and said, "If you have any questions, please ask. There is no distinction between men and women in the court." As soon as the words fell, some officials wanted to attack Mu Yangling. After all, he was the child he watched and grew up. Rong Xian didn't want people to attack Mu Yangling. The reform of the official system was proposed by the princess, but he spoke in general terms, so I don't know what the specific reform of the official system should be. This is a big question, and it's time for lunch. After finishing talking, Rong Xian felt that there is nothing safer than this question. It's better than letting everyone swarm her to discuss the government as a woman, right? The officials below all looked at Mu Yangling provocatively when they heard the question asked by Prime Minister Zhou. They didn't think that a female generation would reform the bureaucracy. Qi Wenjin probably wanted to shift the responsibility to his mother to fool him. Who knew that Mu Yangling sat upright, straightened up, and said in a long talking manner, "Mr. Zhou wants to talk about this question even if he doesn't ask about the concubine's identity." Although the three important reasons for the subjugation of the country that Xiao Xiang mentioned just now are a little superficial, they are also correct. Why is the dynasty in danger once a tyrant and a faint king appear in the past? Because the monarch is supreme. Once the other party becomes emperor, unless there is a coup d'état, it cannot be changed. The officials looked at Mu Yangling in horror, and then looked at the emperor sitting above, shouting in their hearts, "Emperor, Why don't you let Prince Rong and Princess Rong say such outrageous things in court? Qi Ziyuan remained silent with a straight face. Xiao Bao smiled gently and said, "Fourth aunt is right, and you adults may not understand it in your heart. Since the word has come to this point today, everyone should have an open and honest talk." The officials immediately lowered their heads and said in fear, "I dare not wait." Doesn't saying that they are thinking these words also push them on the fire? Mu Yangling glanced at Xiaobao and told him to be quiet. It's better to let her do this kind of villain. Xiaobao is the prince, so let's sit obediently. Mu Yangling leaned forward slightly and said, "My lords, please forgive me. I am a woman, and I have never read a book, so I read a few words randomly in private. If my words are wrong, my lords can advise Prince Rong afterwards. Let him go home and teach me." Mu Yangling turned around and said immediately, "But although I don't know a few words, I have lived in the troubled times of the border since I was a child. I can farm the land and know the suffering of the people. I can also fight wars. I barely know the general trend of the world. I read some history books myself, and I think I still know some truths about the world. Only know a few words, plant a few acres of land, have fought a few battles, read some history books, and dare to talk about government affairs without shame? Then wouldn't officials like them who have read poetry and books be able to talk about the world?" Everyone slandered in their hearts. When I was studying history, I thought, if someone persuades those tyrants and stupid kings to do tyrannical and stupid things, and if someone can change the emperor after the persuasion fails, then the national power will not decline, and the people will not participate in the rebellion because of hardship. When there are traitors and sycophants, someone can deal with them, so that they can no longer do evil and frame the people, so the people will no longer be forced to rebel. If our Daki is strong when there are strong enemies around, then who else can destroy me Daki? And my Daki is rich in land and resources, why can't the national strength be compared with foreign enemies? The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1266. Throughout the ages, many talents have been born, but who can keep a dynasty alive? No, Mu Yangling looked directly at them and said, "Do you adults know why? Because the common people don't have enough to eat, don't wear warm clothes, have no house to live in, no medical treatment for illness, no way out for their children and grandchildren, and no guarantee of life. As long as these problems are not solved for a day, they will still rebel when they are pushed to the extreme. People are like springs. When oppressed by tyrants and stupid officials, they can only stretch their bodies as far as possible to submit, continue to submit, and keep submitting until the tyrants and stupid officials push them to a corner, and then there is a bang spring. If it is loosened or broken, whether it is the former or the latter, the pressure of the rebound will always pull the spring and get injured, and the more you pull it before, the more serious you will be injured." Mu Yangling said, "My son's proposal to reform the official system is just to see that Daki will follow the old path of Dazhu in 200 or 300 years. Many of you present here are adults who stayed from the previous dynasty. You should understand how chaotic the bureaucracy was in the previous dynasty. There is a saying among the people in the south of the Yangtze River, 1 year clears the magistrate, 100,000 snowflakes silver, one by one a prefect with an annual income of 100,000 silver dares to call himself clean, but what about those prefects who are not clean? The imperial court issued 3 orders and 5 orders not to be greedy and cruel. The capital has the Yashitai and the Ministry of Punishment, and there are also censors in the localities to inspect, but why can these corrupt officials stand still?" Mu Yangling said with a sullen face, "Because you officials protect each other, because you are all involved in it, because you all get benefits, including the superior Emperor Jinjian, who also embezzled the people's money." What Mu Yangling said made everyone's faces turn green. But it's not over yet. Think Qi Wenjin's words are ugly? Mu Yangling will tell them with practical actions that there is no worse sound, only worse. It's been less than 3 days since Qin Fang's incident. You must still have an impression of his greedy money. If tens of thousands of officials in the Great Zhou dynasty drank soup, then what he ate was meat, and what Emperor Jinjian drank is blood. Why is Daki's official administration so clear? Because the sage is honest, diligent, and thrifty, and Daki has only been founded for 13 years. Your lords have not forgotten the bloody storms in the first few years of Taikang, so that's why the hand didn't stretch out longer. This is the same as above and below. However, success depends on the character of the superior. People's hearts are the most difficult thing to guarantee in this world. Instead of pinning your hopes on it, it is better to pin your hopes on the system. Even if one day there is an extravagant emperor on the throne, the government should be clear or clear. It will be clear. So this official system has to be changed, and it has to be changed a lot. To prevent one day there will be an extravagant and stupid king in the upper position, and the officials below will not follow the trend to search for the people. Anyone who reaches out and is found should be chopped down and exiled, then go into exile. Only in this way can I guarantee the long-term peace and stability of Daki. All the ministers were stunned. Is this going to force them to die? A fourth-rank young official sitting cross-legged at the end couldn't help but said, then what if the emperor forces us to search for the common people? Before Mu Yangling could speak, Xiao Xiong already despised him. If it's not a reasonable thing, you just refuse it directly, and you are not a courtier. Why are you so flattering and obedient to the emperor? All the ministers looked at the emperor's face again, and were disappointed. The emperor's energy-raising skills became more and more powerful, but his face didn't change at all. Qi Ziyuan, who was sitting on it, was already mad in his heart. Is it really good to confuse the officials so that they don't listen to the emperor? Rong Xian felt that what Mu Yangling said was too idealistic, and asked, then how do you think this official system should be changed? Mu Yangling sat upright and said, first of all, the Prime Minister has too much power. Although Yashitai can supervise the Prime Minister, it also has many restrictions. It is better to abolish the Prime Minister, establish a cabinet, and let the 4 adults share the power of the Prime Minister. Decentralization will not only weaken the power of the 4 cabinets, but also exercise the administrative ability of hundreds of officials. Mu Yangling continued, then came the reform of the local government system. My lord, now the north and west have been taken back, but the place names use the Han names from decades ago, and also use the names of Dajin and Xixia. The local government affairs are chaotic. Some places are even under the jurisdiction of several state capitals, and the affiliation is unclear, so that even the common people don't know which state capital they belong to. Qi Ziyuan immediately said, the magistrates from all over the country have written papers and submitted them. However, since the Westland has just been taken back, there are many questions. I asked the left minister to verify with the Ministry of Officials and Household Affairs. I wonder what is going on now. The minister of the Ministry of Officials and the minister of the Household Department looked at each other, and immediately looked at Rong Xian. Rong Xian bowed his head and said, I have discussed it with you, but it has been ceded for 30 to 40 years because of the loss of land. I don't know what the princess thinks. Mu Yangling said, reallocate the provinces. Mu Yangling paused and said, I'm talking about the whole Daki will be reallocated, and even the powers and responsibilities of local officials must be redetermined to clarify their respective positions. Jurisdiction and powers and responsibilities, and some powers should be delegated. There was an uproar in the court, and this action was too big, even more shocking than Qi Wenjin's amendment to the law. Not only the officials, but even Rong Xian expressed objection. He said tactfully, this matter is of great importance, we should take it easy. Of course, Mu Yangling said, I didn't tell you to do it right away. As soon as everyone was relieved, they heard Mu Yangling say, but you have to know it first, it's all in such a mess anyway, since the provinces need to be reallocated. What's wrong with reaffirming the powers and responsibilities of officials? Most of it won't change anyway. Most of them will not change, but who knows what fatal place you want to change. All the officials regretted it. They knew that she would not be allowed to speak. I don't know if it is too late to stop her now. Of course it was too late, Mu Yangling continued after finishing one point. Anyway, every court meeting was recorded truthfully by the historian, and if they forgot what she said, then let the historian look for the records. Since it is necessary to reiterate the powers and responsibilities of local officials, it is natural that the official system should be revised at the same time. At present, officials can only rely on the rumors of the censors, or the Ministry of Punishment and the Yashitai inspect local government affairs every year, but none of them can become officials. Fool, no one will make the whole world know about corruption and bribery. As for the officials of the criminal ministry and the inspectors, it is easier to deal with them. The time they stay in each place is limited. As long as the local officials have enough control over the place, people will not find out about them, so I think Wen Jinti's proposal to amend the law and loosen the restrictions on people suing officials is not enough. All the ministers looked at the official who proposed to allow Princess Rong to go to court to defend herself. If you come out, we will definitely not kill you, but just maim you. The official obviously knew that he had caused trouble, and sat on the mat with his neck curled up, trying to minimize his sense of existence. Mu Yangling continued to smile and said, I think the supervisory system should be changed, and more powers and responsibilities should be given to the censor. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1267. Mu Yangling's family are all the censors love to patronize. Sometimes she really hates this group of rumored censors, but it is undeniable that although they are sometimes critical, they correct the social atmosphere very well. Even if Chi Heiran wants to spend more money to buy a treasured sword or something, he has to be sneaky for fear that Yushi will say that he is extravagant, let alone other powerful officials. The dignitaries in Daki don't know how much more honest than those in Dazhu. At least Mu Yangling has never heard of any dignitary who dared to rob civilians, women and men in the street, or whose shop was robbed by the dignitaries. Officials in the DPRK also have stricter management of their descendants, for fear of being involved in official positions due to improper family traditions. But that's not enough. What's the use of hearing about it? Mu Yangling hoped that the censors would have more supervisory and investigative powers, so that they could focus more on their work instead of whether their family was extravagant and bought a treasured sword or a horse. Mu Yangling said, removing the restriction of people suing officials will not have a great effect, and as your lords have said, because people have limited access to political affairs, sometimes they are exploited by others without even knowing it. The government should also set up a supervisory agency. The censor should become a local official like the county magistrate and magistrate. They are also assessed every 3 years. According to the rules, the order should be reported to the Ministry of Criminal Justice for review before execution, but if the prisoner refuses to accept the appeal, according to the law, it will be handed over to the prefect for trial, but in most places, the prefect will return the case to the prefect after receiving the official document from the Ministry of Punishment. The former county magistrate retrails, and there are very few people who personally try the trial. Mu Yangling didn't know about this before, and it was Xiao Xiang who mentioned it before she knew that there were still such tricks in the place. He and Xiaobao came across a case during their trip this time. The prisoner refused to accept the appeal and was sent back to be retried by the county magistrate. Fortunately, the county magistrate in charge at the time was quite a good official. Although he was annoyed, he still carefully re-examined it. But how many magistrates in this world can have such a heart? Mu Yangling's proposal to establish a supervisory system is to allow local censors to supervise local officials to re-examine cases, and they can also review evidence and make basic judgments. Mu Yangling said, the Yashitai can be changed into the Metropolitan Procuratorate, which is side by side with the Dali Temple of the Ministry of Punishment. It's just a rumor. As soon as Mu Yangling came up with this idea, aside from the other officials, the Dr. Yushi and the Yushi in the main hall all looked at her with piercing eyes, thinking that Princess Rong's visit this time was not all a bad thing. Qi Xiaoyuan glanced at them, and asked with a smile, "What else? You can finish it together." Mu Yangling smiled and said, "That's too much. Since the Holy Majesty asked me to say it, I will continue. The reform of the bureaucracy is not something that can be done overnight. All I mentioned before are suggestions. Can it be done? How to implement it specifically, Your Majesty has to discuss it with all the adults, but what was mentioned earlier was all targeted officials. Now let's talk about what to do if what happens is not a treacherous courtier, but a tyrant and a foolish ruler." Qi Xiaoyuan was taken aback for a moment, not understanding how the fire came to him. Now the ministers are even more afraid to speak. How can they easily talk about this topic? Princess Rong is protected by Prince Rong. The emperor probably won't settle accounts after the autumn, but their wealth and lives are still in the hands of the emperor. At this time they may say it happily in the hall, and this turnaround may even kill their lives. Mu Yangling seemed to know their concerns, so he didn't ask their opinions at all, but just asked Xiaobao and Xiaoxiang with a smile, "How do you think to prevent it?" Little Bear opened his mouth to speak, but was pulled by Xiaobao, who was sitting next to him, and immediately shut his mouth tightly. Xiaobao looked up at his father, and said seriously, "Father, my sons and ministers have also thought about this issue. Children and grandchildren are unworthy, not to mention people will change. Who knows whether the children and grandchildren will change their minds after they ascend the throne because of the sudden power." Qi Xiaoyuan glanced at the group of officials, not understanding why such a question should be discussed in front of outsiders. Shouldn't it be their family who closed the door and said it quietly? Xiaobao sighed, and said, "If we don't make some preparations in advance, there will only be two results. One is that the people are made miserable by the tyrant's foolish king, and they have to endure until he dies. The other is that the ministers collude with the royal family palace change. Another emperor will do it. No matter which one of the two is, the Qi family will suffer a lot." Qi Xiaoyuan looked at the two children, then at Mu Yangling, and finally asked with the corners of his mouth twitching, "Then what do you think?" "Father, if such a monarch really appears among the descendants of the Qi family, then I think it's better for the clan and the ministers in the court to discuss changing the emperor. And how about sending the replaced emperor to become a monk in a temple or a gymnasium?" Qi Xiaoyuan glanced at the ministers with their heads down, turned to ask Mu Yangling, "You think so too?" Mu Yangling nodded repeatedly, and looked at him expectantly with the two children, hoping that he could agree with their opinions. Qi Xiaoyuan got up and walked down the steps, patted Xiaobao and Xiaoxiang's heads and said, "You guys are still too young. From tomorrow onwards, besides going to court every day, you will spend an hour in the study to attend classes." There was a trace of disappointment in Mu Yangling's eyes, and she knew that everyone would definitely not take it seriously, as long as it was the opinion of women and the naive thoughts of children. Qi Xiaoyuan looked at Mu Yangling again, and said, "Aling, you raised the children very well. Although you are always 2 points more innocent than other children, this is also the heart of a child. In the future, this kind of thing will wait for Heir and come back and talk to him before going to the court to talk about it. As for the reform of the official system," Qi Xiaoyuan paused and asked, "Isn't this something you came up with?" Mu Yangling shook her head again and again. "This is the crystallization of the wisdom of many people." She dare not take credit for it, and whispered, "I didn't think of it." A gleam flashed in Qi Xiaoyuan's eyes, and he asked, "Who mentioned that to you?" Mu Yangling hesitated and said, "It seems that when I was dreaming, someone kept whispering in my ear." "The ministers." Qi Xiaoyuan looked at Rongxian again, and couldn't help but think of what Yuan Hui said about Mu Yangling's blessings and spirits. Qi Xiaoyuan reached out and patted her on the shoulder, and said with a smile, "You child, it's all right, don't worry about this matter. Take the little bear back, This matter will not be discussed again, and the court officials will not use it like this again if things are difficult for him, you can rest assured. After all, Chi Xiaoyuan glanced at the officials warningly. At this time, the officials were at a disadvantage, so Chi Xiaoyuan made this request very confidently. All the ministers are silent at this time, because they are worried about Qi Heiran, and Mu Yangling is a woman, they can't open fire on her at all, and they can't show their strength, so if they don't admit defeat at this time, are they still waiting to be scolded? But they admit defeat with their mouths, but they don't accept it in their hearts. They are just good men who don't fight with women. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1268. Qi Xiaoyuan's appearance of still treating Mu Yangling like a child not only made Mu Yangling very depressed, but also made all the officials speechless. How can there be such a big child? Qi Xiaoyuan ignored their gazes, and continued to teach Mu Yangling in front of everyone, you have been naughty since you were a child, I thought you would be more stable after marrying Hao, who knows that you are still the mother of several children and still mess around like this. The Crown Prince and Wenjin are both smart and talented, so don't teach the children to be mischievous like Hao Ran, otherwise I will directly order them to live in the palace, and you will not be allowed to teach them anymore. These teaching words are a bit intimate and should be said in private, but when Qi Xiaoyuan said it in court, no one would think it was wrong. Everyone could see the emperor's attitude. He kept Mu Yangling and the two children. No matter how much they said today, it was because they were naughty, innocent, and what they said could not be taken seriously. After leaving the court, what they said and what they did today must not be pursued. The ministers looked at each other, and all of them felt that this was a good idea. The changes in the official system reforms that Princess Rong said before were too great. Every time a reform was made, a group of people, even dead people, would be wiped out. Who knows if they will become one of them? Moreover, after the reform of the official system, there are more restrictions on officials, and the removal of restrictions by the people and the officials has become the least important one. It is naturally their wish to pretend that what happened today has never happened. But not all the officials agree. For example, the imperial censors and other censors, they stared at the emperor with piercing eyes. It makes sense. Of course, the official system needs to be reformed. We really want to change from the Yashitai to the Metropolitan Procuratorate. Qi Xiaoyuan ignored their aspirations, and directly waved at Mu Yangling in disdain. Okay, hurry up and lead the two children out, and you are not allowed to go out until Heiran comes back. Mu Yangling pouted and took Xiong Xiaobao away. The ministers couldn't help sighing in their hearts that the emperor and Prince Rong really have a deep brotherly relationship, and they even have such a good temper towards the princess. The civil servants were confused, but the generals who came out from the Qi family army said, the princess has grown up under the supervision of the emperor, and treats her like a younger sister, so she will naturally get closer. Two seniors even stroked their beards and laughed, speaking of which, I still treated the princess as my daughter 20 years ago, ha ha ha. Don't think that Qi Xiaoyuan has won by driving people away. He is implying that what Mu Yangling and Xiaobao Xiaoxiong said in the court today does not count, and no one is allowed to take it seriously and pursue it. How could it be possible to pretend that it never happened if the words entered people's hearts? So Qi Xiaoyuan was still battered. As soon as he announced that the imperial censor would be the next imperial censor, he hurriedly brought two old censors to him, saying that the establishment of the Metropolitan Procuratorate as mentioned by the princess is very feasible. One harm. The two old censors behind the doctor censor immediately said that they would select a clean and honest censor to serve in the local area, and they would definitely perform their duties well and never tolerate corrupt officials. Qi Xiaoyuan hadn't figured out how to get rid of them yet, Rongxian also brought the minister of the Ministry of Officials and the minister of the Household Department with him, and came up and said, "Your Majesty, I feel that it is imperative to redefine the provinces that the princess said. The names of the places in Qi are confusing, and the north and west lands that were newly recovered in the first 3 years are tax-free, but if the jurisdiction is still uncertain after 3 years, the local authorities may fight over taxes." The Ministry of Officials and the Minister of the Ministry of Households nodded quickly. Although Princess Rong's words were very exaggerated, it is undeniable that she has some ideas that are very pertinent. It is a pity that I don't know who gave her these ideas. If such a person can serve the country, just use it. It's true that no one believed that the reform of the official residence system was thought of by Mu Yangling, let alone that it was a dream, as she said. The sun does not talk about strange powers and gods, and few people who can be an official believe that there are ghosts and gods in this world. Qi Ziyuan and Rongxian didn't believe it either, but there was still a monk Yuanhui living in the palace at this time. That monk was nagging, and the number of times he spoke was very small, but as soon as he spoke, he was sure to be sure, they didn't believe it or not. Disaster. When Qi Ziyuan was just a general, Yuan Hui jumped out and said that he could be the emperor, and he really became the emperor. Of course, this is not the most important thing. Qi Ziyuan felt that he and his brothers worked hard to build the world for him to be the emperor, not because Yuan Hui just said it. What really convinced him was that when he was betrayed by Emperor Jinjian to Dajin and trapped in the mountains, the news could not be delivered at that time, but he was the first to figure it out. Based on this, although Qi Ziyuan would not completely believe in him, he would not completely disbelieve him either. But this time, they all remembered what Yuan Hui said about Mu Yangling and Heiran. Yuan Hui said that Heiran is his lucky star, with Heiran around, he can be the emperor, and he will be safe and sound. And Mu Yangling is Qi Heiran's lucky star, with her, Heiran will be perfect, and she also has spirituality, which is related to the luck of the whole Daqi. In recent years, De Qinei's big and small political affairs have indeed her shadow, and she has facilitated them herself. Temple stood up for her. Nowadays, most of the seeds used for farming in Daqi come from Fengshao grain shop, and the cultivation techniques are all based on the pamphlets she printed and distributed, and farming and mulberry are the foundation of the country, which shows her influence on Daqi. And she also influenced Heiran. Heiran reformed the military system, attached importance to maritime trade, opened workshops, and made cannons. Almost every major event has her shadow, even he is often influenced by her, such as the education of several princes. Qi Ziyuan sighed, he didn't want to believe in ghosts and gods, but Yuan Hui's words never seemed to come to nothing. He said that Aling had the good fortune of Daqi, and she really started thinking about Daqi's subjugation. Qi Ziyuan was hit hard today, and his expression was a little dazed. Seeing that all the ministers in the imperial study room were making appeals, he immediately waved them away impatiently, and said, "Okay, it's late today, dear friends, let's go down to deal with the government affairs at hand, and we can discuss tomorrow if there is anything to do." Qi Ziyuan paused for a moment and said again, "Tomorrow we won't be in the imperial court, so dear friends, let's come to the imperial study to discuss politics." The people at Yashitai were excited. Did the emperor intend to propose their proposal? The minister of the Ministry of Officials and the minister of the Household Department looked at each other and breathed a sigh of relief. It seems that the matter handed over by the emperor is expected to be resolved. Qi Ziyuan drove everyone out, leaving Rongxian alone, and when they were all gone, he immediately complained to Rongxian, "What are you talking about, Aling? Why did you say those things in front of so many people?" "Fortunately, I fooled it, otherwise those civil servants and military generals would make trouble, and she would have to shed a layer of skin if she didn't die." Rongxian smiled and said, "She is sure that the emperor will protect her, not to mention the little bear who was bullied by those people first. She is arguing for her son's injustice." Rongxian also understood Mu Yangling, and said with a smile, "Besides, what she said is correct. Those problems do exist. I think she pulled it out because she wanted us not to avoid it." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1269. Rongxian sighed and said, "If you can't break it, you can't stand it." After a long period of peace in the world, corruption will easily breed. We all know these problems, but who dares to discuss countermeasures with the ministers in person? Historically, when the interests of the monarch and his ministers are compatible, there are naturally times when their interests are at odds. The monarch and his ministers are not as simple and pure as the books say. It was him, if the emperor hadn't treated him as before, and he really didn't have too much ambition, he would have changed a long time ago. How grateful Yan Du was when he was invited out by the emperor. In the first few years, he devoted himself to the emperor and De Qi, but people change. After 2 years as the right prime minister, his thoughts became complicated. Rongxian was in this position, and sometimes he was a little tired after seeing a lot. If it weren't for Qi Heiran, Fan Zijian and Mu Yangling would have been the same for 10 years, and he would always think of the difficult days in the Northland from time to time, and I'm afraid it would have changed. It is too difficult for monarchs and ministers to want to be single-minded. It is better to rely on the law, as Aling said. There are laws to follow, so what if the hearts of the people are unreliable? Qi Ziyuan didn't know what was going on in Rongxian's mind, but he said in a shattered voice, "But she is too direct, can those words be said in court? Now I can only use her woman's opinion, don't count fool it for reason." Of course Qi Ziyuan knew that all the courtiers could not be of one mind with him, since everyone has selfishness, he was guarding against them, and they were naturally guarding against him. But these discords and defenses can only be carried out in private, how can they be put on the surface? Have you ever seen someone openly propose that the main purpose of innovation is to weaken the power of the king or prevent official corruption and rebellion? They are all holding the banner of being good for the country and the people, and some words cannot be said, but Qi Ziyuan always feels that Mu Yangling did it on purpose this time, deliberately saying such things in front of the palace, and in the palace to expose the layer of skin that covers the monarch and his ministers. Open. Qi Ziyuan looked at Rongxian. Rongxian and Qi Ziyuan have known each other for more than 20 years, and they can understand each other's thoughts with just one look. He nodded slightly and said, "I also think that Aling did it on purpose." "Why?" Qi Ziyuan trembled the beard on his mouth, and asked angrily, "Just to cause trouble for me?" "It should be more than that," Rongxian said with a chuckle, "I think her main purpose is to make us avoid the inevitable and bring up the topic. Can we still turn a blind eye like before? What's more, the reform of official positions she proposed is not, they are all contrary to the interests of officials, such as yashitai, and administrative transfers. These 2 points will surely win the support of many people, and it will be much easier to do other reforms if these 2 points are achieved." Rongxian paused and said again, "As for the methods she proposes to prevent tyrants and foolish emperors, I think she is mainly to silence the officials. She even said it was so easy to change the emperor, but it was just changing the official system, so why would she not dare?" Qi Ziyuan snorted and said, "But I just think she really thinks so, otherwise who would come up with such a bold idea?" Rongxian chuckled lightly, "Ketchen thinks this idea is really good." Qi Xiu went to stare at him. Rongxian continued, "Your Majesty, as she and the Crown Prince said, if there is a palace change, the Qi family will suffer the most damage, but if it is not a palace change, then it will be a change of dynasty." Qi Ziyuan fell silent as he thought about the lifespans of De Tang and De Zhou recently. Qi Ziyuan was debating whether to adopt Mu Yangling's idea, but Mu Yangling, who led the 2 children out of the palace, was very happy. She touched a child's head with one hand and said, "In the future, if anyone dares to bully you like this again, tell me, and I will block you back." Little Xiong was helpless. "Mom, How do you say that you are playing house like a child? We are discussing political affairs, and conflicts are inevitable. That's not a personal attack. I heard from the servant that those ministers pointed at your nose and called you an idiot. Mu Yangling snorted coldly. How can my son look like an idiot? Obviously they are idiots. What's wrong with you being like your father? If your father is an idiot, can he be a prince? Little Xiong immediately pouted. Are you fighting for me or for my father? Xiao Bao on the side laughed lightly and asked Mu Yangling, fourth aunt, didn't you say that you should do things slowly? Why did you mention so much at once? What if the courtiers are eager for quick success? The failure of innovation has always been due to the eagerness for quick success and instant benefit. Mu Yangling smiled and said, I can mention some things, but you can't. They will be eager for quick success. They will just move forward slowly. Let them argue about whether these things can be done. Seeing that Xiaobao frowned and still didn't quite understand, she touched his head and sighed, I'm a woman, and in their eyes, the things I raised so many stories about the Arabian Nights are women's opinions. They will only sneer, but when you mention it to Xiao Xiong, they will be wary, because no matter how young you are still men, not to mention that one of you is the current prince and the other is the son of Prince Rong, just these two things make them very wary. Mu Yangling looked at the blue sky and white clouds in the sky and continued to whisper, what's more, I also proposed the method of changing the tyrant. This one is even more daring. They will only think that I am telling a fairy tale, and tell me that the Jade Emperor in the sky will be replaced. Human beings are just as ethereal and helpless, just because I am a woman, they subconsciously underestimate me. Xiaobao and Xiao Xiong sensed her faint sadness, and they immediately stepped forward and said, Mother, fourth aunt, we will definitely improve the status of women in the future, and we will never let the world look down on you. Mu Yangling pursed his lips and smiled, touched their heads and said with a smile, I remember what you said. The two children nodded firmly with twinkling eyes. Qi Xiaoyuan, who was in the palace at this time, didn't know that Mu Yangling was abducting his son further and further away. It wasn't until Xiaobao came out with a series of policies after he became emperor that Qi Xiaoyuan blew his beard and stared at Mu Yangling, thinking that he would be taken away. It was a big mistake to entrust the son to Mu Yangling to teach. At this time, although Qi Xiaoyuan didn't have this awareness, he almost blew his beard and stared at him, and then he sent away the people from Yashitai and the minister from the Ministry of Officials and the Ministry of Household Affairs. Obviously they came here for Mu Yangling's speech today, even the clan's side. Qi Xiaoyuan's clan uncle came running to see him in good spirits. Apparently Mu Yangling's words had already been spread. Qi Xiaoyuan suddenly had a headache, looked at Rongxian, and then looked at the food in front of him, immediately turned his grief and anger into strength, picked up the bowls and chopsticks and ate, while ordering, let them go down for lunch first, and then pass the signs one by one. He knew that there was a tough battle ahead, so he worked hard to fill his stomach full. Rongxian looked at the bowl in his hand for a while, wondering if it was too late for him to leave now. Qi Xiaoyuan obviously didn't want to let people go, and sighed with Rongxian, now you are the only one around me who can help. If only Zijin was in the capital, he is very eloquent, and one person can be an envoy for 10 people. Rongxian immediately said, why don't you ask the Minister of the Household Department to send another official to replace him? It would be overkill for Zijin to go and count the stolen goods. If the Holy Majesty is worried about someone being corrupted, why not send a censor from the Yashitai to go with them? If Yashitai wants to reform, it will definitely do its best this time. If Zijin came back to share the firepower with him, his burden would be much lighter. Qi Xiaoyuan also lowered his head to think about the feasibility of this matter. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1270. Fan Zijin was recalled urgently. He thought something important happened in the court, but he couldn't find out why. When he asked the messenger, he was so anxious that he rushed back day and night. he couldn't even drink hot water. Seeing Fan Zijian so embarrassed and haggard, Qi Ziyuan felt a little guilty, and hurriedly told him about the chaos in the court, saying, "Nowadays, less than a quarter of the court supports the reform of the official system, and less than a third supports the administrative redivision. 1. I am the emperor, so it is too obvious that I have a bad position, so Rongxian and Xiaobao are the only ones supporting the court, so you can share some of the burden for them when you come back." Fan Zijian frowned and said, "Your Majesty, why are you so confused? You let her go to the hall to talk nonsense. The most feared thing about this innovation is impatience. Even if you want to change the control, you should do it slowly." "I know." Qi Ziyuan hurriedly nodded to admit his mistake. "I made a mistake in this matter." His original intention was to ask her to come up and pick the two children out. Who knew she could plant herself in? Qi Ziyuan looked at him eagerly. "So you have to help my cousin. I have already asked someone to hold Heiran back, but his progress seems to be going well. Even if it is delayed, it probably won't take much time. Let things come to a conclusion before he comes back, otherwise he will have to turn the world upside down when he comes back." If he knew that Aling and Xiaoxiang were being bullied in the hall, he would definitely take the opportunity to get back the place. The court was already chaotic enough, and Qi Ziyuan didn't want to make it worse. Qi Ziyuan pinned his hopes on Fan Zijian, and Fan Zijian threw himself into the battle with all his fighting spirit, but the situation was actually more complicated than they imagined. The next day, at the court meeting, the ministers quarreled again, and this time even the generals were involved, and the civil and military generals almost fought. Although Fan Zijian's verbal battle against Confucianism temporarily overwhelmed the opponent, as long as the opponent was not convinced, it was useless to overwhelm the opponent with words. Instead, it made them more united against the reform of the official system. Among the 100 officials, except the censors of Yashitai who agreed to the establishment of the Metropolitan Procuratorate, the other officials were somewhat resistant, feeling that the emperor's move was too distrustful of his subjects. Even if the people in Yashitai were in favor of the establishment of the Metropolitan Procuratorate, it did not mean that they agreed with all the reforms of the official system, such as the abolition of the restrictions on people suing officials and the increase of penalties for corruption and bribery. They also opposed it like other officials. However, many officials from the Ministry of Punishment and the Ministry of Officials agreed with the above two items, but they did not agree with the establishment of the Metropolitan Procuratorate. In contrast, the administrative division is much smoother. Through Fan Zijian's arguments and Rongxian's visits and persuasion, more than half of the people in the DPRK and China have agreed to redivide the administrative regions. After 2 days, Fan Zijian's voice was hoarse and he failed to convince people, but he almost enraged all the officials in the court and drowned him. Fan Zijian asked Qi Ziyuan angrily, "Is it necessary to innovate now? Wait a few more years, wouldn't it be better for us to figure it out slowly?" Qi Ziyuan shook his head, and said with a sullen face, "We must continue to be disturbed by it. Now that we have spoken out, it is better to complete it in one go, otherwise it will be more difficult to innovate in the future. Besides, Daki will redivide administrative regions. This is the reform of the official system. Best time." Qi Ziyuan squinted his eyes and said, "It's fine if there is no administrative division. I don't mind waiting for a few more years, but now that the administrative areas are going to be redefined, the reform of the official system must go on anyway. Let's try again and see if we can convince them. If I can't just order innovation directly, then there will be bloodshed." Fan Zijian's expression was also a little heavy. Bloodshed has always been inevitable in innovation. I thought they would be able to avoid it if they were more careful, but who knew it would still not be avoided? Fan Zijian had given up hope of persuading all the officials, so he left the palace and went home a little dejected. At this time, Qi Heiran had already rushed in from the west gate with a few people. He did not go to the palace, but directly brought them back to the palace. Zhu Liang was shocked when he saw Qi Heiran, and rushed to greet him. "My lord, why are you back?" Qi Heiran walked in quickly, and asked, "Master, I heard that the princess was bullied in Beijing." Zhu Liang's face was embarrassing, and he said tactfully, "My lord, who in this capital dares to bully the princess? It's fine if the princess doesn't bully others." Qi Heiran snorted coldly, threw the horsewhip in his hand to him, and said with a sneer, "But I have heard it outside, saying that a group of old and disrespectful people first bullied the prince, and then bullied the princess. Staying at the mansion to take care of them, is that how you take care of them? You even let the lord know the news about the princess being bullied from someone else." Zhu Liang couldn't express his suffering, so he could only cry out for grievances, "My lord, my concubine is indeed not being bullied. If you don't believe me, go to the garden and have a look. The empress is taking the fourth young master and the little princess to fish in the pavilion in the middle of the lake." Qi Heiran glared at him. "I still don't believe you are trash. Is Wang Fei the kind of person who cries in front of children?" Aling wondered why she was sad, but he was not by her side yet. Qi Heiran turned and went into the garden while grinding his teeth. Zhu Liang looked at the prince who was going away without tears, and slapped himself hard on the mouth. At this time, no matter what he said, the princess would forcefully smile in the eyes of the prince. Why should he bother? What a fool! Zhu Liang went out of the inner courtyard with the whip in his hand, hurriedly recruited a guard, and ordered, "Go to the palace quickly to pick up the son, and say that the prince is back." Zhu Liang watched the guards leave with a worried face, and only hoped that the emperor would quickly try to stop the prince. If the prince attacked the houses of those elders, he was not sure if there would be no one in the court tomorrow. Qi Heiran has not yet thought of hitting those officials who bullied his wife, he just wants to comfort his wife first. But the light bulbs are always everywhere, and there are 2 light bulbs that he can't throw away. The little lion and the orb were almost hanging on his father, and they climbed up with one arm hugging him, chattering and shouting, "Daddy, we miss you, do you miss us? Think about it, think about it." Qi Heiran dealt with them casually, looked at Mu Yangling who was sitting beside him with concern, and asked, "Aling, are you okay?" Seeing his concerned eyes, Mu Yangling shook his head inexplicably, "It's okay." Qi Heiran felt even more distressed, pulled the 2 children off him and put them on the ground, then sat beside her, held her hand and said apologetically, "If you feel uncomfortable, hit me and scold me, this time it's my fault. When I was bullied, my grandfather was not around. I'm not being bullied. Who are you listening to nonsense?" Mu Yangling's eyes widened. "Have you been called to the hall 2 days ago?" Mu Yangling nodded, and suddenly realized, "But I was not bullied by others, it was I who bullied them." Qi Heiran didn't believe it at all, and snorted coldly, "You have always been kind and generous, you will bully them? Maybe it's because they have done too many things that you bully them, thinking that when the Lord is not at home, the wife and children of the Lord will be bullied by them gone." Mu Yangling was embarrassed, and was about to explain, when the little leopard and Beza ran up and down on Qi Heiran again, and shouted dissatisfiedly while crawling, "Daddy, don't just play with your mother, you also have to play with your mother. We play, you always forget us." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1271. Qi Heiran helplessly lifted the 2 children off his body and put them aside, and said with a stern face, "Father and Mother have something important to talk about, why don't you go and play on the side first?" "Not good," Beza shouted, "our business is also very important, you always forget about us while playing around." The little leopard also rushed up to hug his father, aggrieved, pouted, and said, "I haven't seen you for such a long time." While talking, he made a big circle. Being hugged pitifully by the 2 children, Chi Heiran couldn't move for a moment. He had already lifted the two children away twice, and he couldn't throw them a third time. Chi Heiran also looked at Mu Yangling pitifully. Mu Yangling picked up the two children and stuffed them into his arms, and said with a smile, "Since you're back, sit with them for a while, and I'll get someone to prepare hot water for you to take a bath and eat." Mu Yangling left his father and son and hurried away. Beizhu hugged her father's neck contentedly, wrinkled her little nose and sniffed him for a while, then immediately pushed her father away in disgust and jumped down, shouting, "Daddy, you stink." The little leopard also immediately climbed off his father, sniffed around him, and immediately said in distaste, "Daddy is such a slob, he doesn't even take a bath." Chi Heiran frightened them with a tiger face, "Don't you want Daddy to hug you? Come, Daddy hug you." The two children immediately ran away yelling, and Chi Heiran chased after them. They were really two stinky kids who wanted to throw him away when they took up his time. No doors, no windows. For a moment, only the screams and laughter of the two children and Chi Heiran's strange cry remained in the garden. Chi Heiran didn't give up until Beizhu and the little leopard ran out, hugged the two children on his shoulders, and walked towards the main courtyard. Seeing the two sweating children, Mu Yangling only gave Chi Heiran a reproachful look, and she just gave a few instructions. Mu Yangling took the two children down and fed them some warm water before stuffing them into the mother's arms. "Hurry up and take them down to take a bath and put on clean clothes." The nuns responded, and hurriedly hugged the two young masters and retreated. Chi Heiran has already entered the bathroom to take a shower. Mu Yangling carried his clothes and went in. Chi Heiran glanced back at her, and immediately beckoned, "Come here and help me rub my back." Mu Yangling sniffed him, and said disgustedly, "Have you not showered for a few days?" "It's not a few days, maybe 3 or 4 days." Mu Yangling said faintly, "It's early autumn, and the weather is still hot." Chi Heiran lay on the edge of the tub to let her rub her back, muttering, "Didn't I hear that you were bullied in Beijing and came back in a hurry? How can you have time to take a bath?" He just received a Ling's letter and the newspaper, and soon he received another urgent letter, saying that Mu Yangling was called into the palace by the emperor for questioning, and a Ling quarreled with the courtiers in the court hall. "My own wife knows that Mu Yangling's eloquence is better than his, but it is still far behind the civil servants who are good at fighting with each other." Chi Heiran was so worried that he didn't sleep all night. At that time, they had just taken down the hill and were counting the bandits inside. Originally, he planned to leave the matter to his subordinates and come back by himself first. No matter what, he has to go home to support Aling. Unexpectedly, he received a secret decree before he set off. The emperor asked him to interrogate those bandits on the spot and wipe out all the contacts and property Qin Fang left behind. Chi Heiran could only stay patiently. Because he was worried about Aling, he found out Qin Fang's people and belongings with great efficiency, and then ordered them one by one, and ran back before he had time to interrogate and count them all. He didn't even close his eyes for the past 2 days, let alone take a bath. Chi Heiran thought, he just didn't take a bath for 4 days and he was fine. If it wasn't for the fact that there happened to be a small waterfall on the top of the mountain where they lived, he would have taken a bath if he took a shower at the next stop. He guessed it would be even more stinky. Chi Heiran groaned, because he felt comfortable being rubbed. He leaned against the tub and fell asleep in one fell swoop. Mu Yangling was explaining to him what happened in the court, saying that no one bullied her, but someone bullied Xiaoxiang, but she also took revenge. Now every official in the court is in a state of distress, and there is no need for them to pursue it. Mu Yangling noticed that Chi Heiran's breathing was getting longer and longer, and immediately walked around from behind him to the front of his body. Seeing that he fell asleep lying on the bathtub, he couldn't help sighing slightly. Mu Yangling stretched out his hand to smooth the wrinkles on his brow, and muttered with a light smile, "With your reputation, who would dare to bully me?" Mu Yangling rolled up his sleeves and gave him a simple scrubbing. He took a big towel and was about to wrap him up. Chi Heiran opened his eyes. He half closed his eyes and pulled the towel in her hand to wipe himself in a daze. After a while, I got out of the bathtub and was about to go out. Mu Yangling hurriedly put on his clothes and said, "Don't catch a cold." Chi Heiran had already squinted his eyes and bypassed the two screens and went directly into the inner room, found the bed, lifted the quilt and lay down in it. Mu Yangling looked at her snoring husband helplessly, so she could only help him cover the quilt. Just as Mu Yangling looked at Chi Heiran with distress and peace, Chi Ziyuan also received the news that his younger brother had entered Beijing. Chi Ziyuan's first feeling was, it's over. The second feeling is that it's too bad, tomorrow's court meeting will only be more lively, and I don't know if he can say that he will be sick tomorrow. Then Chi Ziyuan wanted to pursue the responsibility. He called the chief guard who followed Chi Heiran into the palace, and said angrily, "Didn't you be asked to remove Qin Fangan's connections and property left behind in Daqi? Why did you enter Beijing?" The chief guard immediately said happily, "Back to the emperor, all the people left behind by Qin Fang have been captured, and all the hidden property has been found. The prisoner will be escorted back to the capital in a few days, and the property has been sent to count and protected. It is estimated that he will be able to enter Beijing in 10 days or so. If that's the case, why didn't Prince Rong wait for the property to be counted outside before returning to Beijing?" Chi Ziyuan said that he was not happy at all. The chief guard finally heard that something was wrong with the emperor. He hesitated and flattered, "Leave these trivial matters to the soldiers below. The prince is in a hurry to come back, he must be missing the emperor, and wants to go back to Beijing to share some burdens for the emperor. Government affairs." Chi Ziyuan sneered, and really wanted to smash the bag in his hand, but after all, it was a courtier who knelt down, not his younger brother, so he couldn't hit him casually, so he could only resist the impulse in his hand, and snorted coldly, "I think he misses his wife, right? Really useless." The chief guard patted the horse's leg, and he could only kneel down obediently, not daring to say any more. Chi Ziyuan rubbed his forehead with some headaches, and said, "I'm entrusting you with the matter, you go back to the palace immediately, and don't allow him to enter the palace. Well, it's best not to let him leave the palace, let him stay in the palace with his wife. Let's play, kids. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1272. The chief guard was horrified for a moment. Is the emperor going to imprison the prince? Why is that? Chi Ziyuan didn't understand the fear in the chief guard's heart, and continued, "You go back quickly, and show him closely." The chief guard swallowed nervously, and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, is this humble minister guarding the Lord alone? Then who do you recommend?" Chi Ziyuan felt that as long as the other party could keep Heiran in check and not let him go out, he would not mind giving the other party a position as a bodyguard. If the prince is under house arrest, shouldn't this person be the imperial guard sent by the emperor himself? Why do you still ask him to recommend it? The chief guard later realized that he seemed to have made a mistake, and he immediately changed his words, "Your Majesty, you also know the prince's temper. Apart from the concubine, he also listens to what you and King and say, so let him. If you don't leave the house, you might as well give him an order directly. If the younger brother can listen to him, does he still need to find the chief guard?" Chi Ziyuan glared at him. The chief guard could only go back with a sad face. It seemed that he could only find a way to get to the princess. At this time, Chi Heiran was sleeping soundly while hugging the quilt, and he slept until the middle of the night, only waking up with his stomach rumbling. Chi Heiran turned over with Mu Yangling in his arms, and got up dazedly clutching his stomach. Mu Yangling also woke up, sat up and said, "Are you hungry? I ask someone to cook soup in the small kitchen. Don't ask someone to serve you a bowl of noodles." Chi Heiran pouted, and muttered in dissatisfaction, "Just give me a bowl of noodles." He rubbed his belly and said, just a bowl of noodles, but I want to eat what you made yourself. Mu Yangling was distressed that he came back specially for her own sake, so she put on her clothes and got out of bed, and said straightforwardly, "Okay, I'll get it for you." The broth in the small kitchen had been boiled for most of the night, and when it was fragrant, Mu Yangling made a bowl for him to drink alone. Chi Heiran put on his clothes and sat on a small stool with soup in his hands, drinking while watching Mu Yangling knead the noodles. People in the north know how to make noodles, and so does Mu Yangling. She is very strong and kneads noodles very vigorously, but it is undeniable that the noodles she makes are still somewhat different from those made by the cook. It was rare for Chi Heiran not to dislike him, and he sat and ate quietly, while Mu Yangling sat on the edge and propped his chin to watch him eat, and said after a long time, "Heiran, when we get old, I will make you noodles every day, okay?" "It's not good. Could it be that Grandpa is so poor that he can only eat noodles every day?" Chi Heiran said disgustedly, "and the noodles you make are not delicious. Why don't you think about cooking braised pork for Grandpa?" "Is this the point? Isn't the point that she did it herself?" Mu Yangling pouted at him. Chi Heiran swallowed the last mouthful of noodles, put down his chopsticks, stepped forward to hold her hand and walked back, saying, "You are the princess of the master, you call the slaves and servants, you can cook for the master every now and then, there is no need to eat it every day. Do it, if you are a master every day, you will feel sorry for your injured hand." Mu Yangling was surprised. "You can think of this. It's not because you are tossing and rubbing things on your face and hands every day. You love me so much, I can't hurt your hands just because of one bite." Mu Yangling was moved again, hugged his arm and said, "Just to say this to you, I decided that tomorrow I will cook your favorite food myself. What do you think you want to eat?" Chi Heiran said complacently, "I owe it first, I won't go home for dinner tomorrow, no, it's today, it will be done in 2 hours, right? Why don't you go home for dinner? I want to talk to a few colleagues." This man naturally goes to a restaurant to talk about things, so I probably won't go home for dinner these 2 days. Chi Heiran sat on the bed with a strong horse, patted his knees and said, "Come on, come and sit down, and tell me carefully how they bullied you too." Mu Yangling. She talked for a long time when they were taking a bath together, and he didn't listen to a word. Mu Yangling stepped forward and pushed the person onto the bed, climbed inside and lay down, pulled the quilt on and covered him, and said, "It's fine if you didn't hear me, I just want to reiterate that I was not bullied by anyone, bullying the little bear I've got my place back to, Big Brother is in trouble now, don't go up and make trouble for him, or I won't care about you if he cuts you off later." Seeing that Aling was about to sleep with his eyes closed, Chi Heiran immediately turned over and held him down, and said in a low voice, "Since you don't want to tell Master about this, then let's do something else." Chi Heiran was on a business trip for nearly 10 days this time. It was the time when Xiao Bizheng got married, and he slept for another afternoon and most of the night. How could he sleep at this time? It is the most correct thing to say about food and clothing. Mu Yangling only had time to let out a scream before he swallowed them all in his mouth. As soon as the day dawned, Chi Heiran went to the morning court refreshed, and the chief guard who hadn't slept all night immediately followed him. He tried all kinds of methods to stop him, but it was useless. From the princess to the princes, and then to the palace, various excuses failed to keep Chi Heiran behind. The chief guard could only watch Chi Heiran pull his horse and take a few guards away. He immediately ran towards the front yard, grabbed Zhu Liang's hand and said, "Mr. Zhu, you have to help me, I want to see you, princess." Zhu Liang looked at him sympathetically and said, "The main courtyard hasn't ordered breakfast yet, the prince must have ordered Li Chun and the others not to disturb the princess before he left, so." The princess was not awake, so it was impossible for him to see anyone. Zhu Liang sympathized with him. The chief guard didn't stop him, so Qi Ziyuan saw his younger brother who stood at the top of the court as soon as he went to court. Chi Xiuyuan immediately had a headache, and looked at Fan Zijian behind Chi Heiran. Fan Zijian was tugging at Chi Heiran's clothes, gritted his teeth and warned him in a low voice, "You are fine if you don't leave, but if you dare to spoil the emperor's affairs, I will see how I deal with you afterwards." Chi Heiran insisted, "Am I the kind of person who will do bad things?" Fan Zijian snorted coldly, "You are the one who specializes in bad things." The two muttered a few words and followed the officials to worship the emperor. Chi Xiuyuan felt that today's morning court should end early to avoid chaos. Fan Zijian and Rongxian also felt that today is not a good time to fight for the reform of the official system, so they decided that all matters can be postponed for later discussion. Seeing Chi Heiran's menacing approach, the other ministers also expressed that they are not in a hurry, they can solve their own problems and don't need to discuss it in court, so Your Majesty, it's better to leave the court as soon as possible. Eunuch Wan yelled out the words, "Play early if you have a book, and leave the court without a book." Seeing that the people below did not respond, Chi Xiuyuan immediately understood, and quickly winked at Eunuch Wan. Withdrawing from the imperial court, Chi Heiran turned around and strode out, and said in a loud voice, "My Majesty, I have an answer." Chi Xiuyuan glared at him, and threatened, "What's urgent, Prince Rong? If it's a trivial matter, it's better to solve it in private, instead of bringing it to the hall."